So another method to kind of generate some Greeble and Nurnie items to add to our model is to use the Curve Lathe Brush. So here I just have my model loaded in of the helmet. I've actually gone through and generated, some sculpting details using the trim and clipping brushes, Dynamesh Subtract, and then Projection Master to kind of get some of these areas a little further flushed out. So there's a brush inside of Zbrush called Curve Lathe, and this will allow you to create a curve in which you can then manipulate to generate a shape. So to access this, first thing I'm going to do is hit B on my keyboard, which will bring up my brush menu, and then I'm going to isolate by letter C. I'm going to find the Curve Lathe Brush. So I'm just going to click that. So the basic functionality of the Curve Lathe Brush is that I'm going to start drawing on my model, and you're actually going to start drawing a curve. Now as you're drawing this curve out, you're going to notice this straight line is being generated from your starting point to the end. And then when you release, it's actually going to take that entire curved surface and rotate it around that center line, giving you this kind of effect. Now after you have this drawn out, you can manipulate this actual object, so you can move the actual center line, and you can also move the actual outer lines to deform the surface even more. So this is a great way to kind of generate really kind of complex shapes in a fast manner. Now the resolution, or how many points you have on this curve, is actually controlled by your draw size. So you'll notice I have a blue circle and a red circle. So you want to make sure you're in the red circle and then just change that. So a smaller draw size is going to give you more resolution along that curve, and then a larger draw size is going to give you less resolution. So once you have your draw size set, if you want it higher or lower, just come over and click on that curve again, and it's actually going to update that curve. So you can see now I have less resolution than I did originally on that curve. So now you can just come through and you can kind of manipulate this curve as you like to kind of generate different shapes. The blue circle, when you actually are hovering over the curve, determines how much influence you're going to actually have when you actually click and move that curve. So it's like the radius of influence. So if you want a smaller area of influence to kind of get some really precise precision details, just hold space, and when you're in that blue circle, and just kind of scale that down, and now you're going to be able to make these kind of little changes on the surface of that curve. So you can see how this will quickly allow you to generate some really cool shapes inside of ZBrush. Now right now I just kind of drew this out on my model, so this is a valid method of kind of working with the actual curve lathe. But I want to use it as a little greebly type techie bit. So I actually want to kind of conform it to a simpler shape and then have the ability to kind of bring it in and then move it around with my transpose lines. So I'm first going to undo these guys here, so I'm just going to come right up here to that undo bar and click that first one, and now that's all reset. And now I'm going to come to my tool palette and I'm going to find the plane 3D primitive and just click that, and that's going to load a plane in. You'll notice that this is a primitive 3D object and it has this nice initialize tab here, so if you wanted to change any of these kind of divide functions or the radiuses, you can come over here and change this. Now as we discussed in the other video when we're working with the gear 3D object, that this mesh right now, since it is a primitive, it won't allow us to use any of our kind of sculpting brushes on it. So we need to change this into a polymesh 3D object. So I'm going to come back up to this tool palette here and then just click this Make Polymesh 3D button. So I'm going to get out of polyframes and I'm going to turn on symmetry, so I have a symmetrical line, and now I'm just going to draw a curve out. So I'm going to make sure I'm starting in the center point of the actual plane and clicking and dragging and just drawing a circle out like so. Now if you want to be extremely precise on the actual curve, you can definitely establish it like so as well. So if I know I want that shape to be exactly close to that for this area there, you can definitely draw that out like so. Now you'll notice that right now if I come over and actually start manipulating this curve here, I'm going to lose that center point. So the inner areas of the actual model here, that actual inner center line, is actually moving when I adjust that curve there. So I want this point here to be held tightly and then just allow me to manipulate the curve around it. So to get that functionality, I'm going to come up here to the stroke palette. I'm going to go to the curve subpalette here and I'm going to turn on lock start and lock end. So what this is going to do is going to lock this starting point and lock this ending point and allow me to manipulate this curve over here, and that start and end is not going to move. Now if you want those endpoints to move, you can still move them, you just have to be over top of them to move. So if I wanted to adjust this one, I can still go through and adjust that endpoint, but when you're actually just manipulating the curves on the side here, it's not going to move that end or the start area of that curve. So I'm going to get out of perspective and just kind of manipulate this a little bit more to kind of get some more of this kind of shape out of here. And I'm going to come through and just change, my draw sizes on these areas, and then just kind of come through and kind of play with the actual points here until I get this kind of shape I'm looking for. So this does require a little bit of precision and finesse. Just kind of come through and manipulate these edges here. But it's a very fast way to kind of get some interesting details on your model. So just come through and start generating that kind of surface shape there. And then I know I want this area to be a little bit flat, so I'm just going to pull one of these things here, which will actually start pulling that flatness out, and then I can actually bump this guy up as well. And you can see I'm starting to get that kind of tapered shape. So something like that. So after you're kind of happy with that kind of surface there, now you're also, when you're sculpting on these, you're not restricted to that certain angle. You can definitely rotate around your model and configure that curve. Using this plane object, that curve is going to snap right to the surface there, so it's giving you that kind of a little more precise precision on that actual object. So after you're happy with the actual kind of detailing, because we can always go back and refine this as well, we're just going to come over to the subtool here, and I'm going to come to this split option, and I'm going to do split unmasked points. So this is going to take anything that doesn't have a surface that is masked and just split it off into a new subtool. So if I just click that there, you can see now I have this object as its own tool. So now that this is a mesh, I can go through and start using some of my additional sculpting brushes to kind of clean this up a bit. So I can hit B on my keyboard and isolate the trim brush. So hitting B and then hitting T and then finding the trim curve brush. It's going to tell me it's going to be the active selection. I'm just going to hit OK. And now I can hold Control and Shift and get this nice kind of trim line. I can actually come through and start getting some of those harsh areas back onto the surface of the model like that. I can also come in with any of my sculpting brushes. So if I go to Clay Buildup or say H Polish, and then go to the Transform tab and activate the radial symmetry option. So just coming to Transform, I'm going to turn on Y and then turn on R, and I'm going to up this radial count to say something about 32, and now I can come through and start polishing the surface of this model a little bit more. You may need to divide some to actually allow you to kind of sculpt some of those harsher details in. So just coming to the Geometry tab and then just hitting divide, and that's going to allow you to come in and kind of refine these shapes. So cylindrical objects inside of ZBrush, using some of these kind of standard brushes such as H Polish here, is a quick way to kind of go through and get a little more refinement on these curve lathe shapes after you're kind of happy with the initial kind of result. So you can start pulling in some of these details back on the model and get that kind of surface roughly the same as that actual piece on the object there. So really quick kind of sculpting, just using smooth and H Polish, and then just using the alternate version of H Polish, so just holding Alt and sculpting to kind of bump the back areas or back edges of the surface up, and then just going back in without holding Alt to kind of smooth those areas down. And then I can go to the back side and kind of refine that as well. And so now you can see I have this kind of nice little shape generated. I can trim it once more, so just going to brush menu, B, T, and then finding the trim curve, and then just coming through and just doing a little trim again. If you have subdivision levels on, make sure you delete those. Just come to Geometry and delete, and then you should be able to come through and trim that out. So just cleaning up that front and back side there, and then you can see I have that nice shape. So I just need to pen this back into my helmet. So I'm going to come to the top here and select my helmet, and just position them back to normal. And then I'm going to hold Alt and select the area in which that part kind of appears. So over here, just Alt and clicking. and that's going to highlight that part. And then I'm going to come to the subtool palette here and just click Insert, and then find that PM 3D object. Just bring him in. Make sure he is selected. Now he's a little bit big and he's also rotated, so I'm going to come up to my rotate transpose line and draw one out and kind of rotate that a little bit better. And then I'm going to go to scale as well and just kind of scale him down. And then after you do that one scale, just hit 1 on your keyboard and I'll repeat that kind of scale function until it gets to the rough size. And then just move that into position on the helmet like so. So just using the transpose functionality that we talked about in one of the earlier videos to kind of position this shape where you want it to go. Scaling and manipulating it like that. And moving. And once again, these are also all hotkeys, so W, E, and R will allow you to switch to those pretty quick. Just kind of moving and rotating and scaling until you roughly get it where you want it to go. So we're almost there. That looks pretty good. And then I'm just going to do that mirror and weld function, which is going to take this part that's on the positive side of the model here and shoot it over to the other side. So into the geometry tab over here, and underneath the modify topology, there's mirror and weld. Just clicking that, and it's actually going to duplicate that part to the other side. So that's a quick way to kind of add some of these Greeble Nurnie bits using the Curve Lathe Brush inside of ZBrush.